Have you ever witnessed a moment where, in a matter of seconds, someone's entire life is judged simply by their appearance? A black woman dressed modestly stood silently in the middle of the boarding aisle. No one knew that in her pocket was a powerful card that could change the fate of an entire airline. But at that moment, a pilot walked up to her, looked her up and down, and bluntly stopped her with a cold sentence. "You do not belong in this class of seat." At that moment she had two choices. One was to silently retreat like the many times she had been overlooked in her life. Two was to stand up straight and keep her dignity. If it were you, what would you do? Would you bow your head and let it go? Or would you stand up not to demonstrate power but to regain the respect that is rightfully yours? Before starting this emotional story, I invite you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because just one small action from you will become the motivation for me to continue telling stories that touch the heart and awaken the beauty in each of us. That morning, the western United States was still covered in a light mist, the kind that Coloradoans jokingly call the curtain of surprise. At Sierra Gateway International, people hurried past the security columns and passport control counters as if everyone was in a hurry to catch something more important than their flight. Amidst the hubbub, Arielle Morgan stood silently. Dressed in a soft gray cardigan, a calf-length cotton skirt, and a small backpack, she looked like the body of a high school teacher heading to a conference in town. No one looked at her for more than a second. No one knew who she was. That's exactly what she wanted. Arielle gently pulled the strap of her backpack, walking slowly towards the boarding gate of Flight SV418 Sky Vista Airways. In her hand was a steaming cup of to-go coffee, but her palm was a bit cold. She did not take a sip. In her 17 years working in the aviation industry, nothing had made her as nervous as today. The first day she set foot outside as the new CEO, a person whose face the entire Sky Vista staff had yet to meet. She didn't come here to fly. She came to see, to listen, to feel the cracks that the report card couldn't record. She wanted to know how her team treated passengers when they didn't know the head of the company was standing right in front of them. She wanted to know what Sky Vista's real culture was, not the fine print in the onboarding materials, but the real attitudes, the real behaviors, and what lay between the words. Boarding gate C-17 appeared around the Big Bend. There, the passenger line was splitting into two lanes. One side was for priority passengers, the other side was for the rest of the group waiting for their number to be called. On the LED board, the text read, "Sky Vista Airways, Flight SV418, boarding first class, priority." Only Arielle stepped forward and merged into the first class aisle. She had bought her ticket under her old name, Arielle Jenkins, so no one would know who she was. A first-class flexible ticket cost more than $2,000, and she had paid with a personal card, not a company card. The truth only comes out when one does not think one is serving a leader, she had written in her diary. From a distance, Arielle saw the man in the black suit explaining something to the gate agent. He kept pointing at his watch at the flight information board and frowning as if he were complaining about the quality of breakfast at a five-star restaurant. She was familiar with the scene. The airline industry had all kinds of customers, all kinds of employees. She breathed slowly, just watched. But just as she stepped into line, a voice as sharp as a knife rang out. "Ma'am, this line is for first class only." Arielle turned around. A woman in her 30s, blonde hair tied back, name tag clearly visible, Lydia Harper. Her eyes swept Arielle from her lightly curled hair to her brown flats. It wasn't rude, but it was a look all too familiar to those who had lived in American society for too long, the look of judgment. "I know," Arielle said, her voice as light as a breath. "I'm flying first class." Lydia frowned and asked interrogatively, "Where is your ticket?" When Arielle raised her phone, Lydia didn't wait a second to scan the barcode. She frowned, as if she smelled something unpleasant, then said something that made Arielle pause. "Are you sure you can buy this ticket?" A short question, but enough to freeze the air. Arielle didn't respond. She stood still, her face impassive but her chest aching. She'd heard that tone too much growing up in Atlanta and later in corporate boardrooms. It wasn't loud, it wasn't abusive, but it cut deep, a mild but sharp prejudice, what they called microaggression. "I bought this ticket with my card," Arielle said slowly and clearly. "Please check the system." Lydia quickly pressed a few keys, and immediately the expression on her face changed, not because she found an error but because she found something she didn't understand. A remark appears on the screen that the system automatically attaches to high-security passengers. "Do not announce status VIP internal." But Lydia didn't know this. She assumed the worst. The system flagged you as having an identity verification issue. It could be a fraudulent ticket. "I need to call for further assistance." Arielle took a deep breath, a very deep breath. Two conflicting thoughts raced through her head. Part of her wanted to speak up, to demand a meeting with airport management, to point out that Lydia was being discriminatory. The other part said, "Arielle, calm down. Today is a day for observation. Don't intervene too soon." She chose the second part, but it doesn't stop there. As Lydia stepped away from the counter to call someone, a tall figure in a pilot's uniform, with 4 yellow stripes on his shoulders, approached from the plane door. His salt and pepper hair was combed neatly, his shoes gleaming as if freshly polished. The name tag read Captain Grant Holloway, and as soon as he saw Arielle, he couldn't hide his displeasure. "What's going on?" Grant asked Lydia. Lydia replied quickly, "Passenger flagged. May have intentionally entered first class illegally." Grant raised his eyebrows, looking at Arielle with the eyes of someone more used to giving orders than listening, a look that said, "I know what kind of passenger you are." He stepped straight out, standing right in front of Arielle like a steel door. "Ma'am, first class is not on the right." He pointed down the economy aisle. "You're going the wrong way. Don't jam the gate." His voice was not loud but sharp, the voice of someone who was used to classifying people by dress and attitude alone. Arielle looked up and said slowly, "I'm not mistaken, Captain. My ticket is first class." Grant smiled faintly, the smile like a slash into the other person's self-esteem. "If you really have a first-class ticket, then someone made a mistake. We will clear it up right away. But now I ask you to step aside." Arielle looked into his eyes. Calm, not angry, but she clearly sensed a hidden meaning. He did not believe that a black woman dressed simply could sit in the cabin of people he considered classy. And then Grant said something that only those who have experienced it can understand its pain. "You look out of place in this area." The words were like an arrow piercing the quiet air around Arielle. She had heard similar sentences too many times in her life. At school, at work, at shareholder meetings. She thought, "How many more times do I have to hear this before things change?" Lydia returned, accompanied by 2 airport security officers. "Captain, we need to verify more," she said softly but loud enough to hear. Grant crossed his arms and nodded triumphantly. "Good. Get her out of the boarding area now. I don't want troublemakers blocking the plane doors." Arielle stood still, not resisting. She just looked at Grant for a second longer, a look that was not sad, not angry, just filled with a terrifying stillness. A security officer said, "Ma'am, please come with us to clarify your identity." Someone in the queue whispered, "Again, there are always people trying to get first-class seats." Another said, "She doesn't look like someone who can afford that ticket." Arielle took a breath, then followed the 2 security guards. She passed through the line of onlookers, each gaze an invisible cut. And as the jet bridge door closed behind her, Arielle heard the click of the lock, a small but sharp sound. The sound was like a boundary. The sound opened a new chapter that none of them could have expected. Because in just a few minutes, the person who was kicked off the plane would make a phone call that would change everyone's fate. And Captain Grant Holloway will wish he hadn't come to gate C-17 this morning. The morning at Sierra Gateway International was already noisy, but in Arielle Morgan's mind, the time she sat waiting in the waiting area after being asked out by security was strangely quiet. She placed her backpack beside her, her hands clasped together, not because she was shaking or afraid, but because old, very old memories were slowly emerging, as if this morning was just a new link in the chain of things she had experienced all her life. Growing up in Atlanta's Eastwood district, a child doesn't usually get much chance to dream, but Arielle was always different. People still call the neighborhood rough, but for Arielle it was where she learned the kindness of the old neighbor who fixed her lock for free, or the strength of her mother Monica Morgan, who worked 2 jobs every day just to make sure her daughter didn't miss out on any of her dreams. As a child, Arielle would accompany her mother to the laundromat where she worked. The smell of soap, the warmth of industrial dryers, the clanking of metal, all of it was part of her childhood. Every evening when the shop began to empty, Arielle would use a folding chair as a desk, the neon light above shining on an old math book. Her mother would watch from afar, her eyes always filled with worry and pride. There were days when a few white customers would come in, look at little Arielle in her old school uniform, and jokingly ask her mother, "Does she work here?" She still remembered her mother's confused eyes, her hands clenching the edges of the scarf, as if she wanted to say something but swallowed it back. At those times Arielle just bowed her head and continued her homework as if she didn't hear, but in her heart each of those words were engraved like small scratches. Time passed, and she became a student at Georgia State University, a black girl in a business management class, where most of her classmates came from business families or had parents who were investors. She still remembers the first day when a classmate asked her, "Are you majoring in this to get an administrative job? This major is very stressful." She just smiled, not arguing, but in her heart she said to herself, "One day I will walk into meeting rooms where they think I don't belong." She kept her word. At 29, Arielle became one of the youngest financial consultants at Redwood Capital Group, a position many people dream of. But the road was not smooth. She remembers meetings where men in Armani suits talked to her as if she were just an assistant. They looked at her prepared slides without even looking at her until the top manager walked in and said, "This slide is very impressive. Who made it?" And when Arielle replied, they fell silent. The silence was always the same. Not a silence of admiration, but a silence of surprise mixed with a little discomfort when they realized that the person who had made that impression was not the face they had expected. But Arielle wasn't angry. She was just using it as fuel, a fuel no one could see but powerful enough to carry her far. By the age of 40, she had become one of the most prominent figures in corporate restructuring. When SkyVista Airways, an airline that had lost the trust of its customers over the years, was looking for a new CEO, her name appeared on a short list from 3 different companies. The board of directors reviewed her application, and Charles Beaumont, chairman of the board, said a sentence that silenced the entire boardroom. "If anyone can revive this company, it's Arielle Morgan." And so she was chosen. Not because of her noise, not because of her flashy promises, but because she had something very few people had: calmness, steadfastness, and unconditional kindness. Sitting in the airport waiting area this morning, Arielle suddenly remembered the day Charles invited her to his private office to talk before announcing the appointment decision. "Arielle, you understand that this responsibility is about more than just financial recovery," Charles said, his voice deep. "You will have to change the long-standing culture of a firm that once thought that customers existed to serve them." Arielle looked him straight in the eye and replied, "I know. And I also know the first thing that has to change is the way they treat ordinary passengers." Charles nodded, as if that was the answer he was waiting for. "So, where do you want to start?" "From where the truth cannot be hidden," Arielle replied. "From the boarding gate." She kept her word. But she had no idea that just a few minutes into the experience things would go so wrong. The moment Lydia looked down at her, the moment Grant blocked the plane door, the moment the passengers around her jumped to conclusions faster than their hearts could beat, none of it made her angry. But it made her sad, a deep, quiet, uncomplicated sadness. She had thought that these things happened mostly in places with less cross-cultural contact. But even in the airline industry, an industry where professionalism should be the top priority, invisible prejudices have a way of creeping into every crack. Arielle placed her hand on her chest, feeling her breath. She had promised to observe. But now she realized, what she had just seen was not just a phenomenon. It was a deep, long, simmering cultural problem. Arielle looked up at the airport clock. 8:17 a.m. Flight SV418 was scheduled to leave at 8:40. She knew time was ticking, and she felt a movement inside her, not anger, but determination. When she closed her eyes, the image of her mother appeared. Her mother's hands were rough, her eyes were gentle but sad. Every time she had to endure the contempt from others, her mother never complained. She endured silently. She only said one thing to her daughter, "Arielle, you don't need to scream. Just stand firm." Arielle opened her eyes. She straightened her back a little. A warmth spread through her body, the familiar feeling she had when she knew she was about to do something big. A small voice in her head asked Arielle, "Do you have to be so forceful? Or should we just be quiet and let things pass?" But another voice, stronger, more determined, replied, "If I keep quiet, how many more people will be treated like I was this?" In mourning, she knew she couldn't stand outside any longer. Arielle stood up, put her hand in her cardigan pocket, feeling the phone nestled in her palm. She knew the next call would change everything. This whole morning, this whole flight, SV418, this whole Sky Vista Airways. Little did she know that it would also change the life of Captain Grant Holloway, who was sitting comfortably in the cockpit, completely unaware that the troublesome passenger he had just dismissed was the airline's new CEO. Arielle took a deep breath, then dialed the number. A deep male voice said, "Charles Beaumont Nghi." Arielle replied softly but sharply, "Charles, I need you right now." And the story really begins from there. The atmosphere of Sierra Gateway International is always a noisy, exhausting one, but there's no denying that it has a very American rhythm, hurried, matter-of-fact, and full of lives passing each other like separate streams. After calling Charles Beaumont, Arielle Morgan didn't immediately return to Gate C-17. She sat down on a metal bench by a large window overlooking the runway where planes taxied in line in the morning chill. Outside, the soft winter sun shone on the dew-covered ground, creating a half-awake, half-dreamy feeling. She wanted a minute to see things as a normal passenger. A minute to listen to the heartbeat of this airport, a place filled with hundreds of thousands of people, each with their own worries, their own joys, and their own fears. Beneath her feet, the cold, tiled floor reflected the flickering light from the flight information board. Next to her, a boy of about 5 years old was trying to drag his own suitcase, walking slowly. He turned to call his father, "Daddy, the suitcase is too heavy." The man bent down and smiled gently. "It's okay, let me pull." That simple scene reminded Arielle of her mother. She remembered her mother dragging 2 heavy bags after each shift, then turning to urge her daughter to sleep early so she could go to school the next day. She never let Arielle see how tired she was, even though it was easy to see on her face. A bit of warmth crept into Arielle's chest, soothing the remaining frustration. But the warmth didn't last long, as the loudspeakers sounded again from above. "Attention all passengers. Flight SV418 to New York City is now in final boarding for first class and priority passengers at Gate C-17. Arielle took a deep breath. The flight was still boarding. Captain Grant Holloway was still preparing for takeoff, as if nothing had happened. She felt something. Not anger, but regret. Shame on people who still believe they have the right to judge based on appearance alone. Shame on an airline that was once a source of pride, now allowing this to happen right at the top, the customer-facing level. Shame on Sky Vista for letting its culture drift so far from what it once stood for. A group of passengers just passed by. Someone was complaining about the delay of a previous flight. "I can't believe it. It's late again. One day I waited for 3 hours. The woman walking next to him replied, "They don't maintain the same standards as before." I remember when Sky Vista was famous for its service. Arielle heard every word. No one knew who she was, and that made what they said all the more true. She turned her eyes to the stream of people passing by. An elderly woman searching her purse for a paper ticket. A young couple with 2 children fighting over a tablet. A businessman on the phone frustrated because he had to reschedule a meeting. All of these people have one thing in common. They want to be treated kindly. Just that. Nothing more, nothing less. Arielle suddenly thought of the board meeting a month ago. Charles Beaumont had asked her, "Arielle, what do you believe is the company's biggest problem?" She replied with a sentence that the council did not fully understand at that time. Service culture is not measured by revenue but by how we debate the bon, treat the most vulnerable. Now she knew this morning was the test of that faith. The sound of wheels screeching against the floor drew Arielle's attention forward. A middle-aged woman with wispy, curly hair was struggling to push a suitcase that was too big for her. She looked nervous, looking back and forth between her boarding pass and the information board. "Honey," she called to a young airport employee, "which way is gate C-17? I'm afraid I'll miss my flight." The other employee pointed impatiently. "Go straight and turn left. C-17 is at the end. You have to hurry." Not a smile. Not a polite nod. Arielle bent down to pick up the old lady's woolen hat that she had just dropped. "Gate C-17 is not far, Uncle," she said softly. "I'm passing by there. Let me take you there." The woman gave her a small, grateful smile, but it was enough to make Arielle feel something warm inside. Small gestures like this, Arielle thought, were what she wanted her employees to embody: raw kindness that didn't require formal training. Only as Arielle watched the old woman walk away did her worries return to her. Part of her still hoped she had misunderstood, that what Lydia and Grant had done was an isolated incident. But deep down, Arielle knew that wasn't true. Years of corporate consulting had taught her to sniff out the smallest signs of trouble. And there were plenty of them this morning. The tiredness in the way passengers mentioned Sky Vista, the coldness in the staff's voice, the arrogance in Grant's eyes, and the obvious discrimination in Lydia's behavior. No, this is not personal. This is cultural degradation. A soft ping from his phone signaled an incoming text message. Charles wrote Arielle, "I'm asking the operations team to check the runway. Wait a few more minutes. Do not leave the area." She pursed her lips and typed a line, "I'm still here. When you're ready, I'll be ready." After sending the message, Arielle looked up at the runway. A Sky Vista plane had just begun taxiing. The light reflected off the metal, creating a long streak of light. The sight reminded her of the first time she had flown at 16 on a budget flight to California for a summer course. She pressed her face against the window for the entire flight because the feeling of the open sky before her eyes was so different from the small streets where she grew up. "Freedom always begins with having room to fly," her mother once said. Now Arielle knows that freedom is not just about flying but about being treated like a human being when she gets on the plane. A girl of about 13 was sitting nearby, glancing furtively at Arielle. She seemed to have witnessed the moment Arielle was taken away by the security guards. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her voice tiny. "Miss, they said you were causing trouble, but I didn't see you do anything." Arielle looked at the little girl's clear eyes. Her heart ached slightly. "Do you really think so?" she asked. "Yes. I was standing in the back row. I saw you just standing there. I thought something was wrong." Arielle smiled, placing her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Thanks for noticing. Adults are not always right." The little girl smiled shyly, then ran to where her parents were calling. But the simple words touched Arielle more than she expected. A child sees the truth. A seasoned pilot does not. That distance speaks volumes. Arielle sat back, her heart slowly steadying. Her calm was not resignation. It was the calm of someone accustomed to rising from injustice, but not allowing herself to slide into cynicism. She knew, in a few minutes, all the masks would fall, and what happened on Flight SV418 would no longer be private. A deep voice came from the loudspeaker. Runway 27R, temporary hold. Arielle closed her eyes slightly. She knew the signal was meant for her. At the end of the corridor leading to C-17, the atmosphere became more tense than usual. The airport staff's walkie-talkies occasionally emitted a small crackle, as if the communication system also sensed something was off the usual rhythm. Lydia Harper stood at the boarding counter trying to keep her face neutral, but her eyes kept darting toward the jet bridge entrance. Though she didn't say it, Lydia sensed that this morning wasn't entirely normal. There was a nagging discomfort in her gut, like a small scratch on her shoe that she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was because of that woman. Maybe it was because of the sudden feeling of dissatisfaction at seeing someone walk into first class who didn't look like the type Lydia thought they should look like. Lydia grew up in a wealthy suburb of Kansas, in a family that valued neatness and property. Her father taught her, "Don't let others take advantage of you. They will find a way to interfere if you are soft-hearted." The saying was so ingrained that Lydia applied it to every situation, even when it wasn't necessary. She was used to making snap judgments, to categorizing people based on their appearance, their clothes, their body language. And this morning, when Arielle Morgan stepped up with her gray cardigan and calm face, Lydia saw one thing: not first class. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone, at least not in her mind. She was just following her gut feeling, though that gut feeling was sometimes fueled by prejudice rather than understanding. At the boarding counter, Lydia tried to shake off her impatience. She kept her voice even. "Next passenger, please scan your ticket." A middle-aged white woman walked over. When Lydia scanned the QR code on her phone, the screen showed seat 3D. Lydia immediately broke into a bright smile and said warmly, "Have a wonderful flight to New York." The woman smiled. "Thank you. You are so cute." Lydia loved sentences like that. It made her feel like she was doing something right, being a model employee. But right after that smile, Lydia's mind was drawn back to the image of Arielle Morgan being asked to leave by security. A scene that other passengers would probably forget after a few minutes, but to Lydia it was like a confirmation that she was right to suspect Arielle. Lydia didn't realize that this right was built on prejudice. She only knew that she felt like she was acting according to the rules. A gate area support staff came over. "Voice low, Lydia, security wants to confirm the information of the passenger you flagged as suspicious." Lydia nodded quickly, tapping on the computer screen. "I just took notes systematically. The remark code is not clear. I'm not sure who she is." The other employee was silent for a few seconds. Then he said something whose meaning Lydia did not fully understand. "Showing security remark is usually not worth adding." Lydia replied, "I just followed the procedure." She had no idea that the remark was for internal VIP passengers. She also had no idea that the her Lydia was referring to was the new CEO of the airline. On the runway, a SkyVista Boeing 787 was preparing to push back from the gate. Captain Grant Holloway in the cockpit had just completed a checklist and told the cabin crew to prepare the gate. Lydia couldn't hear Grant clearly, but the snap of the radio was loud enough for her to sense that everything was going as usual. Lydia looked at her watch. 8 minutes to departure. She thought about Arielle for a moment, wondered if the woman was upset, wondered if she knew what was wrong. A slight noise startled her. A brunette was filming a video on her phone. The camera pointed toward the glass door overlooking the runway. Lydia frowned. "No filming in this area." The girl was startled. "I just filmed the plane." But Lydia turned away, not wanting to get involved. This morning had been troublesome enough. As the last passengers entered, Lydia looked up to see a man in a suit approaching, his face flushed with haste. "Miss, I'm late. Will I still make it?" Lydia immediately gave a gentle smile that Arielle had never received from her before. "Yes. I have time. Please come in. Your seat is 1A. Thank you. You are so cute." A compliment, a cheerful wink. Lydia loved interactions like that. People who seemed trustworthy, right? People who made her feel like she was doing the right thing. She never realized that right only appeared when the other person looked like what she considered normal. But then that moment was interrupted by a small bell from the desk. A notification popped up, runway hold Flight SV418. Lydia frowned. What is this? She pressed open the system, hoping it was just an error message. But no. A red line appeared below, temporary stop initiated by operations control. Lydia's heart beat faster. She had never seen this happen before takeoff. No weather reports, no mechanical problems, no signs of any disruption to the flight. Maybe the system is faulty, Lydia thought to herself. But when she looked up at the large glass door, she saw something that made her breath catch. A black SUV, yellow warning lights flashing, heading straight for Flight SV418. The SUV was driving at an unusual speed, followed by 2 airport security vehicles. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. "What is going on?" she whispered. She looked around at the passengers. Some had pressed their faces against the windows filming. Phones were raised, cameras flashing, creating a chaotic, curious atmosphere. Lydia looked at the support staff in confusion. Are there police there? Has anyone reported anything? No. But that SUV is the executive car, you see, the other employee said, his face pale. Lydia turned back to look at the runway. The SUV had stopped in front of the plane, blocking the taxiway. She had no idea that in that SUV was the woman she had refused service to that morning. She had no idea that her life was about to take a completely different turn. All she knew was that her chest was tightening with a strange feeling. Not shame, not guilt, but premonition. A feeling that this morning was no longer normal, that the way she had looked at Arielle Morgan, upward judgmental, was about to be exposed to unquenchable light. And that the mask of politeness she has worn for so many years may be falling into the orbit of a bigger mistake than she thought. In the cockpit of a Boeing 787, Captain Grant Holloway is in a particularly good mood. For him, preparing for takeoff is like being on stage, a stage where everyone must believe him, listen to him, and obey him. At 54, Grant has been flying for nearly 30 years, and the feeling of being in command seems to be in his breath. He adjusted his collar, looked through the small mirror on the panel, and quickly smoothed his neatly combed gray hair. He liked the way he looked in his pilot's uniform, neat, authoritative, familiar. It made him feel right. Next to him, First Officer Dana Caldwell was checking a series of cockpit parameters. Dana was younger, calm, soft-spoken, and always careful. But Grant didn't appreciate people who were too quiet. He believed that toughness was what made a good captain. Grant glanced at Dana and said, "Please check the fuel flow again. I don't trust the report just now." Dana nodded, her voice polite. "Yes, I am checking again." Grant liked the feeling of being obeyed like that. He leaned back in his chair, relieved. Everything had gone smoothly this morning except for the inappropriate woman at boarding. Just thinking about it made Grant feel a little annoyed. One wore a pale gray cardigan and sneakers, staring straight ahead as if she cared nothing for anyone. The look on her face made Grant feel uncomfortable, as if she didn't know her place. He muttered, "I told you the economy is on the right." Dana heard but did not react. He just looked at his watch, a few minutes to take off. Grant turned on the radio. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." The voice of Jerome Fields, the chief flight attendant, rang out softly. "Cabin ready, Captain." Grant nodded, satisfied. A perfect moment, a perfect flight, another day of proving himself indispensable, until the voice of ground control rang out. "Sky Vista 418, hold position. Do not enter runway." Grant frowned. That didn't happen often unless something major happened. "Ground 418 here. We have completed all the checklists. What is the problem? 418 standby." "Instructions from operations control." Grant's eyebrows twitched. From operations control directly. That was unlikely to happen, or if it did, it was a very serious thing. He looked out the window, and then he saw it. A black SUV, yellow warning lights flashing, shot across the runway like an arrow. Followed by 2 security vehicles, they headed straight for the plane. Grant jumped up from his chair. What the hell? Dana also turned back. Is that the executive car? Jerome walked quickly from the front compartment to the cockpit door, his voice low but clear. Captain, the passengers are talking. What's the matter? Grant leaned his hands on the dashboard. Nothing. Maybe there's something blocking the runway. It's none of our business. But Grant's voice was shaky. He felt a chill run down his spine as he saw the cars parked directly in front of the plane like a living wall blocking the taxiway. Seconds later, from the walkie-talkie, Sky Vista 418 shut down engines. Repeat, shut down engines now. There's no doubt about it. This isn't a technical problem. This is an order. Dana Quay sang. Grant, Captain, we must obey. Grant gripped the armrests of his chair. He hated being controlled. He hated being interfered with. But he couldn't resist that order. He growled. Fine. Engine 1 and 2, shutting down. The engine noise gradually died down from the familiar powerful sound to a low hum, then to silence. The whole plane fell into a heavy silence. Jerome whispered, Captain, the passenger is filming. Grant gritted his teeth. Tell them to sit down. Tell them to be quiet. But as Jerome turned to leave, Grant froze. A familiar figure appeared on the stairs attached to the plane door. A woman in a gray cardigan. Calm, not angry, not in a hurry. But there was something about the stance that made the entire plane's hallway freeze. Dana swallowed. Captain, it's her. Grant stood still for a second, then chuckled. Good. I'll tell them to get her out of. But that sentence died in midair when he saw that following the woman was Charles Beaumont, chairman of the board. Grant never saw Charles appear directly on the runway unless there was an extremely serious incident. Dana whispered, Captain, this is not good. Grant swallowed, trying to regain his authoritative demeanor. I don't care who she is. She's causing trouble. I'm just doing my job to protect the plane. Jerome looked at him with a strange look, no longer one of absolute obedience. A little disappointed. Grant said harshly, Don't look at me like that, Fields. But he himself felt uncomfortable with his voice. It was not as confident as before. Grant turned back to the glass door. The woman was approaching. She walked as if she owned the runway. And the truth is, she owns it. Jerome entered the cabin to pick up Arielle, but Grant heard whispers coming from the first-class cabin. It's her, the person who was fired earlier. How could the CEO of the company be? Grant felt the blood rush to Dovelake. His ears. As if his body were reacting to a truth his mind had been trying to deny. The cockpit door opened. Jerome stood there, breathing slowly but clearly. Captain, she wants to see you. Grant sneered. Meeting for what? To apologize. I don't, Captain, Jerome said slowly, as if trying to keep his voice from shaking. That's Arielle Morgan. Grant was silent, not surprised, not confused. But it was the silence of one who had just heard a verdict. As Grant stepped out into the first-class cabin, he sensed a change in the atmosphere. No one spoke loudly, no one stirred. All eyes were on him and the woman standing near the door, Arielle Morgan, the unruly passenger he had removed that morning. She stood straight, her face calm, her eyes not angry. That made Grant even more upset. He pointed at her. You are the reason the plane was detained. What do you want? Arielle looked at him as if she were examining a layer of dust covering an old object. I want nothing from you, Captain Holloway. Murmurs spread throughout the cabin. Grant felt his face burning. He forced himself to stay calm. You caused trouble at the gate. I just ensure security. That is my responsibility. Arielle replied, her voice as light as mist but as sharp as a well-sharpened blade. Security is not an excuse for you to insult passengers. Grant was stunned. Arielle continued, You misused your power. You refused to see my boarding pass. You made up a story about me trying to force my way onto the flight deck. Those words were recorded. Grant opened his mouth to object, but Arielle interrupted. And most of all, you did those things to the CEO of the very airline you work for. That moment, the moment the concepts of right, wrong, and true power came crashing down, made Grant Holloway feel something he hadn't felt in 30 years of flying. Smallness. The air in first class became so thick that even breathing was difficult. Every little sound, the click of a seatbelt against a chair, a soft intake of breath, the rustle of a coat was strangely audible, as if the entire cabin were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Arielle Morgan stood in the aisle, her figure straight, relaxed yet strong. Her calm was like a layer of clear water on the outside concealing the raging current within. Before her, Captain Grant Holloway no longer had the same steely confidence he had had in the cockpit. He stood hunched over his hands, clenched as if he didn't know where to hold them. The silver hairs on his temples trembled as the wind blew in through the plane door. No one spoke. No one dared to speak. First-class passengers who were used to being pampered and served to the teeth now sat still, feeling as if they were witnessing an earthquake whose epicenter was right before their eyes. Grant took a deep breath, trying to find his familiar authoritative voice. "You cannot use your position to threaten the crew. This is my territory. I am the one in charge of this plane." His voice trembled slightly at the end of the sentence. Arielle did not answer immediately. She let a few seconds pass, allowing the truth to sink into the man standing before her. Finally, she said, "You have responsibilities, yes, but responsibility does not mean the right to abuse." The statement was not angry. It was the truth. A cold human truth, one that the listener could not escape. Grant looked around, hoping someone would speak up for him. But everyone avoided his eyes. Even Jerome Fields, who always respected him, stood silent, his face heavy with thought. Arielle continued, "I stand before you as a passenger. I am blocked, suspected, insulted, not because I caused trouble, not because I broke the rules." Her eyes stopped right on Grant's. For a moment he felt seen through. "But because I don't look like the person you think deserves to enter this compartment." Some of the passengers looked down. Some fidgeted. They knew she was right, and it made them uneasy. Grant took a step back. "You can't. You're misunderstanding. I was just following the rules. I was protecting the plane." Arielle tilted her head and asked softly, "Who are you protecting the plane from, Captain?" From a woman standing still, handing over her boarding pass. Grant did not speak, could not speak. Arielle lowered her voice, but the weight in her voice was enough for the whole compartment to hear. "I'm not the first person to be treated like that. And you know it." Grant paused. His eyes were averted, as if she had just brought up a truth he had tried to bury for years. Arielle did not attack. She simply continued in a steady, low, powerful voice. "I know the complaints. I know the passengers' complaints. I know you've treated others the way you treated me this morning." A black passenger in row 3 sniffled, trying to contain her emotions. An elderly white woman bowed her head, clasping her hands together as if thinking back to something from the past. Grant swallowed, looking for a way out. "What you say is not fair," Arielle replied immediately, not harshly but firmly. "Unfair is how you use your power to put others down. Unfair is how you ignore a valid boarding pass because you don't like what I'm wearing. Unfair is how you use your arrogance as a rule." Grant paled. For the first time in years he felt something he thought he had left behind as a young co-pilot: shame. Arielle turned the handle of her crossbody bag slightly. It was a small movement, but it signaled that she was moving on to the next step. "I'm not here to insult you, Captain. I'm here to make one thing clear." Grant looked up, his eyes bewildered. Arielle said slowly, "A person can make mistakes. But when that mistake comes from prejudice, from contempt, from considering others inferior to oneself, then it is no longer a mistake." She took a step closer, her voice low just enough for Grant to hear. "That is the choice. A choice he has repeated many times." Grant clutched the back of the seat, like someone trying to hold on to something before being swept away. Arielle stood up straight, looked around the cabin and declared, "I am Arielle Morgan, the new CEO of SkyVista Airways. And right here, right now, I am announcing Captain Grant Holloway, you are suspended. Effective immediately." The cabin exploded in near silence. No cheers, no applause, just shock. Shock to the point of paralysis. Grant opened his mouth as if to protest, but no sound came out. Arielle pointed lightly toward the door. "You can pack your things and leave the plane. Operations will take over your case when we land." In that moment, Grant Holloway, who had once considered the cockpit his throne, no longer felt like a big man. He felt like an old man stripped of his last piece of metal. Jerome, with a heavy face, stepped forward. "Captain, I will escort you." Grant looked at Jerome, his eyes pleading, angry and hurt in layers, but Jerome just shook his head ever so slightly, a sad kind shake. Grant bent down to retrieve his flight bag. The zipper clicked dryly like the closing of an all-too-familiar door. He turned and walked down the aisle. The passengers looked at him, but no one said anything. Some people felt sorry for him. Some people saw his worth. Some people looked at themselves. But everyone understood. This moment would change the company's culture. As Grant reached the door, he looked back at Arielle. No longer angry. No longer authoritative. Just a small, dry question. "What made you do this immediately?" Arielle looked at him. There was no victory or defeat in her eyes. No gloating, just a very human look. "Because if I don't stand up today, hundreds of others will have to suffer the same thing as me." Grant bowed his head, then stepped out of the plane. The door closed behind him, a soft click, but it sounded like the end of an era. Arielle exhaled slowly. She was not happy, not proud. She just felt the responsibility on her shoulders getting heavier. Jerome approached, his voice a little choked. "Thank you for doing what many of us could not." Arielle replied, "I'm just doing my job, Jerome." But right inside her, a small voice said, "And for my mother, for her daughter, for everyone who has ever entered a space and been told they didn't belong." As the plane door closed behind Captain Grant Holloway, the first-class cabin was filled with an eerie silence. No one moved. No one touched their water glasses or adjusted their seatbelts. It was as if they had just witnessed a scene too great to digest. In the cockpit, First Officer Dana Caldwell stood frozen in her seat, feeling her heart skip a beat. Dana had never experienced a moment like this in her 12-year career. A captain was suspended on the spot, right in front of passengers, right on the plane about to take off. That never happened. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. But every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the way Grant had dismissed the passengers, the arrogance, the questioning, the refusal to open up, and the fear in Arielle's eyes as she was forced to back down under the authority of a man who used a loud voice to cover his own shortcomings. Dana rested his hands on the dashboard, lowering his head slightly. He wasn't a conflict-prone person. He wasn't a competitive person. But he couldn't pretend that what had happened this morning was an accident. Dana had seen Grant begrudge passengers of color many times. He had heard some of his sarcastic comments in the pilot's lounge. He had seen Grant dismiss a female colleague's opinion because she was too young. But Dana kept quiet, because he thought he was not in a position to change anything. He used to think, "I am not the one who created the problem. I am just doing my job." But now, seeing Arielle Morgan stand up for what's right, Dana feels ashamed. Ashamed for being accustomed to silence. Ashamed for letting his own convenience override his sense of duty. Ashamed for letting a woman suffer an injustice he could have prevented in the first place. A light knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. Arielle Morgan was standing there, not in the powerful manner of a CEO who has just suspended a pilot, but in the calm manner of a human being talking to another human being. Dana stood up, startled. Miss Morgan." Arielle nodded slightly and stepped into the cockpit, the atmosphere in the small space immediately calming. She looked around her eyes, taking in every detail, every control button, every indicator light, every flicker of worry in Dana's eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," Arielle began in a voice as soft as a warm breeze. "Are you all right?" Dana swallowed. "I am trying to stay calm, ma'am." Arielle understood. She had seen that look before, the look of people who wanted to do the right thing, but had lived so long in the system that they were conditioned to fear change. She took another step. "Do you know why I want to get back on the plane?" Dana shook her head. Arielle spoke slowly, each word clearly. "Because I want to see one thing in this situation: who will choose right and who will choose easy." Dana bowed his head, not daring to look her in the eye. "I am sorry I didn't do anything at the jet bridge." "You didn't do this," Arielle replied, "but you can fix it." That made Dana look up. For the first time since the chaotic morning, he sensed opportunity opening up before him, a chance that would change not just this flight, but himself. Arielle continued, "According to Sky Vista's records, you have enough flight hours to be considered for captain. Your qualifications are beyond question. I just need to know one thing." She paused, for a beat, a pause that nearly stopped Dana's heart. "Are you willing to take responsibility for guiding this flight to New York?" Dana opened her eyes wide. You are offering me the job of captain of Flight SV418. "Yes." Arielle's voice was still very calm, as if this was obvious. "I believe you are capable. The question is, do you believe in yourself?" Dana looked at the dashboard before him, the familiar buttons, the lights he had seen 1,000 times before. Nothing had changed, but everything had. He remembered the times Grant had brushed him off. "You lack experience. You're too soft. To be a captain, you need to have courage." Dana squeezed her hands lightly. Grant's words kept coming back as if to pull him back into his old self-consciousness. But this time another voice broke in. Arielle's voice, low, deep and sure. "You witnessed what was wrong, and you are still here. That speaks volumes about your character." Dana took a deep breath, a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for so long. He raised his head, his eyes brighter. I will do it. I agree." A small smile appeared on Arielle's lips, an unpretentious smile, but one filled with warmth, like the smile a teacher would give to a student who had just surpassed himself. "Good. I'll have the operations team update the system. You'll have a captain in the right seat. Captain Reeves is deadheading on this flight." Dana nodded vigorously. "Yes, I will try my best." Arielle placed a hand lightly on the cockpit doorframe. "No need to try your best, just fly with your true value." It was a reminder not just for Dana, but for Arielle herself. When Arielle returned to first class, Dana stood still for a few seconds. He looked at his hands, hands that had flown planes for years but had never been trusted. He whispered, "Captain Caldwell, this sounds strange, but it also sounds right." Almost right enough to make his eyes sting. A light tap sounded behind him. Captain Reeves, the man in question, was standing there, his face calm, his eyes steady, like someone who had seen enough. Caldwell, Reeves said softly, "I heard we were flying together today." Dana smiled, a smile he didn't think he could muster after this chaotic morning. "It's my honor, Captain." Reeves got into the right seat and fastened his seatbelt. "I'm here to help. But you're in command of this flight. Don't forget that." Dana sat in the left seat, the captain's seat, the seat he thought he would never get to sit in. His hand rested on the joystick. His heart beat slower, no longer nervous but a rhythm of certainty. And he knew it wasn't Arielle who gave him this position. It was she who gave him the belief that he deserved it. It's bigger than the title. Outside the first-class cabin, Arielle stood still for a moment, not to catch her breath, but to feel the pulse of something changing. She wasn't looking for victory. She wasn't looking for the thrill of bringing someone down. She just felt one thing deeply. Culture change doesn't start with a big decision. It starts with one person choosing to stand for what's right. And this morning Arielle knew she saw such a person, Dana Caldwell. She walked back into the passenger compartment, where many people were still in shock. But when their eyes met hers, something new sparked. Not fear, not confusion, but it is faith. The belief that this airline is really changing. The first-class cabin returned to order after Arielle left the cockpit, but that order did not feel like peace. It was like a heavy morning mist. Everyone sat still, but each person's heart was entangled with unspeakable questions. No one knew what to make of Arielle. They had seen her come in her plain gray hoodie, embarrassed, offended. Now they saw her back, but straighter, her eyes brighter, the walk of someone who was setting a new standard for an entire airline. No words were spoken, but every look contained a kind of silent acknowledgement. Arielle felt that gaze very clearly, but she chose to keep her face calm. Not because she wanted to appear strong, but because she knew that in the atmosphere that was as tense as an overstretched string, what people needed most was not an assertion of power, but rather calmness. She walked slowly down the aisle, feeling the engine start up again, soft, steady, warm, like a breath recovering from pain. Jerome Fields stood waiting in the middle of the cabin, his hands behind his back, as was his habit when meeting senior leaders, but his eyes were filled with emotions that were difficult to hide. "Miss Morgan," Jerome said softly, "is everything all right?" Arielle looked at him, her eyes deep and sympathetic. "I'm fine, Jerome. Thank you for telling me the truth then." Jerome's shoulders slumped a little, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders since the morning. He wasn't the confrontational type, but he wasn't the type to just stand by and watch something go wrong. He'd been torn when Grant fired Arielle, not because she was CEO, but because he'd known it was wrong from the start. Arielle saw it clearly. "You just carry on with your work," she said softly. "I want passengers to feel safe and respected. The rest, I'll take care of it." Jerome bowed his head slightly. "Yes, ma'am." Arielle was about to leave, but Jerome called out softly, "Miss Morgan, thank you for returning to the plane." Arielle stopped, smiling very slightly. "I'm not coming back for myself, Jerome." Her eyes held something deeper, a wound that had been created by similar moments today more than once, from one person. "I came back," she said, "because if I left quietly, maybe another woman, another man, a child, would have to suffer the same thing. I don't want that to continue." Jerome didn't say another word, but his eyes spoke volumes. "I understand." The plane began to taxi down the runway. The passengers settled into their seats, but no one spoke as usual. People still fastened their seatbelts, checked their phones, closed their curtains, but everything was quiet. Some people tried to read the newspapers on their tablets, but their eyes kept glancing at Arielle. Some tried to look calm, but their hands on the arms of their chairs were shaking slightly at what they had just witnessed. Arielle knew. She felt every tension in the air. And she gave them time. She's not someone who wants people to see her as a hero. She just wants them to understand, really understand, that power is only meaningful when it's on the side of what's right. She pulled out her phone to check an unsent email, then took a deep breath. It was an email she kept for herself whenever her mind was reeling from a big decision. "There is no absolute right or wrong. But if today you choose what is true to your heart, tomorrow the world will be a little better," she read, then folded the phone. As the plane came to a complete stop at the end of the taxiway, the intercom blared Dana's voice for the first time as captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Caldwell. We will begin takeoff procedures in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for being on this flight with us." Just one simple sentence. But his voice trembled slightly, not because of fear, but because of responsibility. Arielle looked up at the ceiling of the plane as if she could hear his genuine confusion. She smiled. The boy was doing well. An elderly woman in row 3B leaned over and whispered to Arielle, "Miss Morgan, is that the new pilot? He sounds nice." Arielle turned her face, smiling softly. "Yes, and kindness is what the sky always needs." The woman nodded, her eyes seeming brighter. "That statement is not just for her, but for everyone who has ever thought that toughness and authoritarianism are the requirements for leadership." The engine noise increased, strong but steady. The plane taxied onto the runway, stopping for a signal. A moment of silence fell like a heavy blanket over the cabin. Arielle placed one hand on the arm of the chair, feeling the familiar vibration, the vibration of a new beginning. Inside the cockpit, Dana glanced at Reeves. Reeves nodded. "You can take them off, Caldwell," Dana whispered. "Yes, Captain." But this time he didn't tremble. He placed his hand on the lever as he had done 1,000 times, but the difference was today he was actually trusted. The engine roared with power. The entire cabin tilted slightly backwards as SV418 began to pitch forward. Arielle looked up, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She had been on countless flights, but none had been as meaningful as this one. The plane leaves the ground, soars, steady. Some passengers breathed a sigh of relief. Some applauded softly. No one told anyone, but this moment of takeoff was unbelievably light. As the plane reaches cruising altitude, the seat belt sign turns off and the cabin lighting turns a warm yellow. Jerome began serving drinks. Arielle bowed her head to read but found it difficult to concentrate when the slow footsteps stopped beside her chair. She looked up. It was the man sitting in seat 1C, a gray-haired businessman whose face was usually serious but now looked somewhat embarrassed. "Miss Morgan," he said, "I want to apologize." Arielle closed the book and placed it on her lap. "You did nothing wrong." The man exhaled confused. "I saw everything just now, but I just sat there. I should have said something. I should have told the captain that he was behaving inappropriately." Arielle smiled slightly, but it wasn't a smile that made others feel comfortable. It was a smile that made people look into their own hearts. "We don't always have the courage in the right moment," Arielle said. "But that doesn't mean we can't be better from the next moment." The man bowed his head as if receiving a lesson but not feeling lectured, only seeing his eyes opened. "Thank you," he said. "Maybe you sitting here is what makes us want to be better people." Arielle looked out the window. The sky was bright. "That's also why I came back." She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the engine lull her to sleep like a long stream of water. But deep in her heart a new knot was forming. Not about Grant, not about the passengers, but about the hardest thing. Could what she did today actually change an aging system? The question wasn't easy. There was no quick answer. But when she opened her eyes and saw Dana standing outside the cockpit talking to Reeves with the new confidence of someone rediscovering her true worth, she knows at least one thing: big changes start with small changes. One person at a time, and she won't give up. Arielle opened her eyes as the cabin light faded to a soft glow. 3 hours had passed since SV418 left Sierra Gateway, but time seemed to move at a different pace, both long and short, just enough to calm the mind, but also enough to stir old thoughts. She leaned back and looked out the small, coin-sized window. The sky was so blue it seemed unreal, stretching endlessly beneath the wings of the plane. The fluffy white clouds drifted silently by like old memories carried away by the wind. But Arielle's memories don't fade away so easily. A chill ran down her spine as the image of Grant screaming at her flashed back to her, his flushed face, his piercing blue eyes, the gaze of a man who believed power was a natural gift for his sex. Not because she was a passenger, because she was a black woman. Arielle closed her eyes, letting the sound of the engines wash over her, but her mind drifted back to years ago, when she was just a young intern at a small airline, standing blankly in front of the cabin door, where another captain had once said to her, "You should be a flight attendant. Technical or dispatch roles aren't suitable for a woman like you." She remembered standing still, feeling as if someone had lifted the weight off her. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't. Arielle was too young in those years to know how to fight back against the injustice she had just faced. No one stood by her side to protect her. No one spoke up. There is no one like Dana. There is no one like Jerome. She leaned her hands on the chair, took a deep breath, let the old pain seep out and disappear like the mist on the glass in winter. That day she was silent. Today she is no longer that young girl. A confused voice rang out from the front. "Miss Morgan, sorry, I don't want to bother you." Arielle opened her eyes. It was a young man in his 20s, seat 4A, who had been clutching his notebook tightly since takeoff. He was confused, but his eyes had a sincerity that few young people could maintain in a plane cabin full of strangers. "It's okay," Arielle said. "Do you have something to say?" He swallowed lightly, then said in a small voice, "I just want to thank you. You made me think about a lot of things." Arielle gently put the book down. "What are you thinking about?" He looked down at his hands, which were shaking slightly, as if saying something he had never shared with anyone. "My mother is a coordinator for a small airline in Boise. She often tells stories of being looked down upon by superiors or being scolded by customers. She endured a lot, but she still tried her best to support me and my education." He looked up, his eyes slightly red. "I grew up thinking, it's okay, that's life. I just have to endure it. But when I saw you stand up today, I realized there's no reason for someone to treat you wrongly just because they're used to being in a higher position." Arielle was silent for a moment. She never expected that morning action would become a small light shining on a young person's life. "What is your name?" she asked. Evan Miller." Arielle nodded slightly. "Evan, you're not wrong to want to avoid trouble. But sometimes not speaking up doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you haven't come across the right time to make a choice." Evan looked at her intently. "What about today?" he asked. Arielle smiled. "Today I learned a new choice." His face relaxed, relieved, as if a string had just been untied from his heart. A small sound came from up ahead, and Arielle saw Jerome cupping his hands over his mouth, smiling. He tried to hide his emotions, but his eyes kept glancing toward the cockpit like a child waiting for a treat. "Jerome," Arielle called. He was startled. "Yes, Miss Morgan, what's funny?" Jerome laughed, his eyes sparkling. "Do you want to hear a secret?" Arielle tilted her head. "Depends on the level of secrecy." Jerome bent lower and whispered, "Miss Caldwell just flew through some light turbulence. Nothing serious, but normally every captain handles it very technically and coolly." Mr. Caldwell said, "Sorry, it's a little bumpy, like an old Ohio highway." Arielle laughed out loud, a rare laugh in the middle of a long, tiring day. Jerome continued, and the whole cabin burst out laughing. "I have never seen passengers laugh while the plane was shaking." Arielle leaned back in her chair. "You see, leaders don't have to force themselves, just be real." Jerome looked at her for a long time, then said in a warm voice, "Sky Vista is lucky to have a CEO like you." That statement made Arielle's chest tighten slightly. She had to prove her worth for so many years that she had forgotten what it felt like to be acknowledged. A small word was enough to touch a soft corner in her heart. "Thank you, Jerome." As Jerome left, Arielle opened her phone to check her email. A message from the legal department popped up in front of her eyes. "We have initiated a formal suspension process for Captain Holloway. The FAA may request further investigation. We will provide an update." Arielle put the phone down for a long time, not rushing to answer. She felt more heavy than light. Not because Grant deserved it or not, that much was clear, but because she understood that every action she took had consequences. A career halted, a family lost its source of income, a man confronted with his darkest side. Arielle has no regrets, but she is not emotionless. She placed her hand on the small indentation next to the chair, a habit of people who think more than they speak. And the question returned, "Are we doing the right thing, Arielle?" At that moment the loudspeaker rang out, Dana's voice clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to pass through an area of clear weather and excellent visibility. If you look to your left, you will see the horizon open up with sunlight shining through the clouds." The passengers turned their eyes to the windows. Arielle looked too. The sky was filled with sunshine, golden as honey fading to a soft orange under the endless cotton clouds. Arielle said softly to herself, "Yes, the truth always shines through." She glanced sideways toward the cockpit. The door was ajar, but she could see Dana's figure sitting upright, his hands steady on the controls, the sunlight reflecting off his shoulder blades as if awarding him his own medal. Arielle smiled slightly. The heaviness in her heart eased. If her change today can create that much, then it was all worth it. A moment later, when the light in the cabin dimmed, a young flight attendant approached. "Miss Morgan, Captain Caldwell would like to ask, if you have a few minutes, he would like to speak privately after we reach a stable altitude." Arielle was a little surprised. "Dana wants to see me, yes," he said. "Just a few minutes." Arielle nodded. "Tell him I'll be in the cockpit as soon as he's ready." She watched the flight attendant leave, an indescribable feeling rising in her heart, light, deep, like a thin thread connecting people who were gradually embarking on their own journey of change. She put the book back on her lap and closed her eyes for a moment, not to rest, but to prepare for a conversation that she knew would be more important than she thought. The atmosphere in the passenger compartment became quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something, but they themselves did not know what. It was not a feeling of tension nor of unease. It was like the moment before a light rain, when people look up at the sky and know that the weather is about to change. Arielle straightened her light coat and rose from her chair. She had no need for a bag or papers. Her conversation with Dana was not about office or formality. She sensed that as soon as the flight attendant spoke. Arielle walked down the aisle, where a few passengers nodded slightly when their eyes met hers. Not a bow of respect for position, but a recognition of someone who had done what everyone wished they had the courage to do. As Arielle approached the cockpit, Jerome stood there as if waiting. "Miss Morgan, the captain is waiting." He opened the door for her, his eyes narrowing in unconcealed warmth. "I think he really needs this conversation." Arielle nodded slightly, then walked in. The SV418 cockpit was dimly lit, the only light from the instrument panel reflecting off the faces of the two pilots. Captain Reeves was watching the navigational instruments, while Dana sat still, her hands on her knees, but her shoulders stiffened at the sound of the door opening. Arielle slowly walked in. Dana stood up reflexively. "Miss Morgan." "No need to stand at attention, Dana. I'm just a passenger entering the cockpit." Reeves chuckled lightly, then skillfully gave up space. "I'll check the backup data in the auxiliary compartment. You two talk." The small door closed. "And ATL, Command 9. The space was left with only two people, a captain trembling slightly with the new responsibility, and a CEO quietly observing the future of his team of pilots. Arielle sat in the passenger seat, turning to face Dana. "You said you wanted to see me?" Dana nodded, but looked a little confused, as if he didn't know where to start. "Yes. Miss Morgan, I don't know if I should say this, but if I don't, I might regret it." Arielle crossed her arms lightly. "Just say it. Be honest." Dana inhaled, eyes fixed on the sky ahead. The vast expanse of blue seemed to release everything he had held back for so long. "I've sat right here," he said, pointing to the captain's seat armrest, "many times. But never before have I been allowed to sit like I am today." Arielle was silent. Not out of surprise, but because she knew this story was deeper than just a title. Dana continued. "I worked under Captain Holloway for almost 2 years. Every time I presented a technical opinion or asked him to review the procedure, he either scoffed or ignored me. I knew he had a problem with black passengers, but I didn't think he had a problem with his colleagues." Arielle tilted her head. "And you, what do you think about that?" Dana sighed, her voice small but true. "At first I thought he was just a difficult person. But then I realized there are things that can no longer be called difficult, but prejudice." Arielle felt a chill run down her spine. Not out of surprise, she knew full well the old system had a lot of things to undo, but hearing it from the co-pilot himself was something else. Dana turned around, facing Arielle completely. "Miss Morgan, was I chosen as captain because Grant was suspended, or because you believe I really deserve it?" Arielle looked into his eyes, eyes that touched the vulnerability that Dana hid so well behind his professional facade. she answered slowly, each word engraved in space. If I didn't believe you were worthy, I wouldn't have entrusted the lives of nearly 200 people on this plane to you. Dana stopped breathing for a second. Arielle continued, I have read your profile. I know you entered the flight school on a scholarship. I know you almost quit your job because you could not stand the pressure of the authoritarian culture. I know you have never complained even when you were treated unfairly. She looked deeper, as if to pull him out of his own protective shell. But I also know you have something that many veteran captains don't have. You know how to listen, you know how to think, and most importantly, you know how to respect others. Dana blinked quickly, his gaze softening as if someone had touched a corner of his heart he never thought anyone would understand. I have never, he said softly, had anyone say that to me. Arielle smiled softly but powerfully. Then let's start getting acquainted. Dana laughed, small but true. He leaned back in his chair, feeling as if a weight he had carried for too long had been lifted from his shoulders. But there is still something I want to say. Miss Morgan. Yes, when you were kicked off the plane this morning, I saw it all. I should have spoken up. I didn't have the courage. I'm ashamed of myself. Arielle shook her head. Dana, courage is not the absence of fear. It is still doing the right thing when the time comes. You did the right thing by accepting to lead this flight. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be good. The two looked at each other, and an invisible thread connected them, not the thread of superior and employee, but the understanding of two people who had both overcome injustice in two different ways. They meet in the middle, though. At the point of knowing how to stand up, a light knock sounded on the cockpit door. There, Reeves. He walked in smiling, sorry to interrupt. We're about to enter a mild depression, Caldwell. It may take a few minutes to stabilize the plane. Dana nodded, her confidence returning. Yes, I will prepare. Arielle stood up. I will let you do the work. Dana looked at her, his eyes different from the first, steadier, lighter, and with a new light. Thank you, Arielle. The way he called her name was not casual. It was with trust. Arielle nodded slightly and stepped out of the cockpit. The door closed softly behind her. She stood for a moment in the small compartment connecting the cockpit and the passenger compartment, her hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat steady. She didn't expect that conversation to touch on her old pains. But thanks to that, she knew she did the right thing, not just to discipline a misbehaving captain, but to open the door for someone else to step up to the position they have long deserved. As Arielle returned to first class, a few passengers looked at her as if to ask if she was okay. She smiled, not the smile of a winner, but it is the smile of someone who is on the right track. When Arielle returned to first class, she could feel the change in the air. It was no longer the stuffiness of the morning nor the tense turmoil of Grant's suspension. The air now felt like the time after a heavy rain, calm but still with a chill in the wind. She sat back in seat 2A. Her back was against the seat, but her mind was focused on nothing. The conversation with Dana still echoed in her head, clear, raw, and carrying a subtle weight she never expected to hear from a young co-pilot. A waiter walked up. Miss Morgan, do you need some water? Arielle looked up, her eyes softening. A glass of water is fine. As the flight attendant left, she turned to look out the window. The sky beyond was a little grayer, a cold bank of clouds stretched like a gloomy wall across the path. SV418 was about to pass through it. Reeves' voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to enter an area of light turbulence. Please fasten your seat belts. A few passengers jumped. An old woman clutched the armrest. A little boy hugged his teddy bear to his chest. Arielle saw it all, and suddenly remembered her childhood, the rare flights that her mother saved up for months to buy tickets for the times. She trembled when the plane shook violently, and her mother always squeezed her hand, smiling and saying, "It's okay, Ari. The plane is just breathing." Arielle smiled, a warm smile, one she didn't even know she could keep. The plane began to shake slightly. The metal shook and vibrated in rhythm like a nervous heartbeat. Jerome walked the aisle, reassuring each passenger with a friendly smile. "Everything is fine, ladies and gentlemen." But Arielle noticed his hand was shaking slightly, not because of fear of flying, but because he knew this morning's story would spread. Part of him was worried about the future of the company and the future of people like Dana. Arielle called softly, "Jerome." He turned back. "Yes, Miss Morgan, sit here for a moment." Jerome was a little surprised, but he pulled the passenger seat in front of hers and sat down. The light fell on his face, revealing the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. Arielle said very softly, "What are you worried about?" Jerome was silent for a moment before confessing, "I'm afraid, after this spreads, people will conclude that our company has serious problems. That we are out of control. I'm afraid that everything will be blamed on the cabin crew who did nothing wrong." A real pain, a worry that only service workers can feel so deeply. Arielle understood. She had been there. She had been in the middle between clients, between pressures, between decisions from above that she could only brace herself for. She put her hands on the edge of the chair, her voice low. "Jerome, the responsibility for building culture doesn't lie with frontline employees. It lies with leadership. It lies with me." Jerome looked up. Arielle continued, "This company is not weakened by someone like Grant. It is strengthened by people like you." It took Jerome a few seconds to swallow the compliment. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he wasn't used to being seen as a pillar of strength instead of a burden. Finally he sighed, his shoulders relaxed. Thank you very much." Arielle nodded slightly. "No culture is perfect, Jerome. But if we have people in every position willing to do the right thing, we will never be afraid to be shaken." Jerome stood up slowly, as if re-energized. "I will take good care of the passengers, don't worry." Arielle looked on, feeling lighter. A strong jolt hit the belly of the plane, making several people jump. Evan, the boy in row 4, was thrown slightly from his seat, his eyes wide. Arielle saw that and turned around. "Evan, are you okay?" He gripped his seatbelt tightly, his face pale. I'm sure it's okay. The plane was shaking too much." She smiled, her voice reassuring. "It's okay. There are strong winds at this altitude. The pilot will adjust the flight path." Evan nodded, trying to catch his breath. Arielle realized he was still holding the notebook tightly in his hand like a talisman. "Is that book important to you?" He looked down, hesitant. "Yes. It's a diary. I write down small goals every day to remind myself. I'm a bit forgetful of having confidence in myself." Arielle smiled slightly. "Confidence is not inborn, Evan. It is built day by day from small things." He looked at her intently. "Have you ever lacked confidence?" Arielle let out a small laugh, a laugh that caused nearby passengers to look over. "I've had too many days like that, Evan. But I've learned that other people can't determine your worth unless you let them." He gripped the notebook tighter. His eyes were no longer afraid of the noise. The plane suddenly shook again, but this time no one screamed. Everyone calmed down. The intercom lit up. Dana spoke up. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjusting to avoid crosswinds. Everything is under control. Thank you for wearing your seatbelts." His voice sounded certain. Arielle leaned back, her eyes looking into the distance, a quiet pride suddenly rising in her heart. Not for herself, but for the team she was leading to a new culture, one that didn't see kindness as weakness. After a while, as the noise died down, the cabin lighting changed to a soft, warm tone. The murmur of passengers began to return. Arielle felt her stomach tighten, not because she was nervous, but because she realized she hadn't eaten anything since morning. Jerome turned back just in time, as if sensing her thoughts. "Miss Morgan, I just heated up some chicken soup. Anyway, you need to eat to ease your fatigue." Arielle smiled. "Can you read my mind?" Jerome winked. "CEO or not, still have to eat lunch on time." Arielle took the bowl of soup, feeling the warmth spread through her palms. She took a sip and the warm taste reminded her of her mother's kitchen, rustic, simple, not flashy but enough to soothe the heart. She raised her head and found several passengers staring at the cockpit. Their voices were faintly heard, murmuring, "The new pilot is really good. The flight was smoother than I expected. I don't know if it was because of him or the calmer weather," Arielle chuckled. Sometimes the most ordinary compliments are what people need the most. After finishing her meal, Arielle leaned back in her chair, intending to close her eyes and rest for a bit when her phone, which was in airplane mode, vibrated with an offline notification, a note she had set herself before the flight. "Choose what is constructive, not what is retaliatory." Arielle looked at the text, subconsciously reminding her of tonight's meeting at New York headquarters. She would face the press, the shareholders, the pilots' union, the executives. And people will ask, "How are you going to handle the fallout?" Arielle closed her eyes. An image of Grant standing on the tarmac, his flight bag in his hand, his face contorted, flashed through her mind. She didn't feel sorry for him, but she understood one thing: change is not just punishment. Change is creating a new path. A soft voice rang out from behind. "Sorry, Miss Morgan." Arielle turned back. It's the old lady in seat 3B, kind face, eyes full of experience. "I just want to say—" She put her hands on the shoulder of the chair in front of her to keep her balance. "What you did this morning will be remembered for a long time." Arielle nodded slightly. "Thank you. I was just doing what needed to be done." The old lady smiled gently. "You call it need to do, but for many others, it is hope." Arielle felt a lump in her throat, but she smiled the smile of someone who understood that her responsibilities now extended beyond the office or meeting minutes. But right here, in the minds of everyone on this plane, in the hearts of everyone who never met her but will hear her story, in the sky wider than any airline. The speaker came on again. "Captain Caldwell is reporting we are about to enter calm airspace. You may relax." Arielle leaned her head back in her chair. Peace of mind. But deep inside, waves are still waiting to rise, because she knew the real test was coming. The plane settled into a sky that stretched like a blue silk. The sunlight filtered through the white clouds, casting a soft light on the passenger cabin, enough to make everyone feel more secure. But for Arielle Morgan, this peace was just a thin shell hiding another storm that was brewing, a storm she knew she had to face the moment SV418 touched down in New York. She put the book aside and leaned back in her chair. Though her eyes were half closed, her mind was racing, thinking about the upcoming press conference, about the shareholders, about the executive team, about the public reaction, and about what headlines would be in the papers tomorrow. Pilot removed mid-flight after confronting new CEO. Sky Vista faces discrimination crisis. She wasn't afraid of those headlines. What worried her was that someone else would feel hurt again because they felt labeled, grouped into the bad group, just because they worked in the same system as Grant. Arielle sighed, her hand rubbing lightly between her eyebrows. Just then, a soft sound came from right in front of her chair. It was Evan. He stood there, his hands clasped together, looking both hesitant and determined. "Miss Morgan, could you listen to me for a moment?" he asked softly. Arielle nodded. "Of course, Evan. Please sit down." He sat in the opposite chair, his back slightly hunched like someone holding a long sadness. "I used to want to be a pilot," Evan said, his voice more matter-of-fact than usual. "But a few years ago I gave up on that dream." Arielle tilted her head. "Why?" He took a deep breath. "I joined an aviation internship program when I was in college. I really liked it. But I met an instructor. He told me straight up, 'Someone like you will have a hard time getting into a big airline. They prefer a different type of person.'" Arielle felt her heart tighten slightly. He continued, "At first I didn't understand. Then I realized he was talking about my skin color, about where I came from. And I believed him. I thought I had no chance." Arielle looked at him not with the eyes of a CEO, but with the eyes of someone who had experienced similar trauma. She said softly, "Evan, you know, sometimes what people say about you isn't true, but if you believe it, it becomes a shackle." Evan bowed his head. His voice trembled. "What happened this morning makes me think I gave up too soon." Arielle smiled, a warm, trusting smile. "Then maybe it's time for you to think again." "Do you think I still have a chance?" Arielle put her hands on the chair and leaned forward. "Opportunity always exists for those who are willing to stand up again. Dana is a living example of that." Evan looked toward the cockpit where the doors were closed, the light from the control panel reflecting off the door frame. He nodded slightly, as if rewriting the important decision in his mind. He stood up and said softly, "Thank you. You give me hope. Something I have forgotten for a long time." Arielle looked at his shoulders, feeling strangely light. Hope, the simplest yet hardest thing to keep in life. Arielle's train of thought was interrupted when Jerome walked quickly towards her. His face was not panicked, but it was clear that something was worrying him. "Miss Morgan, there is a passenger who wants to see you. In economy class." Arielle was a little surprised. "Who is that?" "An older woman. She said she just wanted to talk for a few minutes. But she was quite emotional." Arielle nodded. "Take me there." Jerome led Arielle down the narrow aisle that separated first class from economy class. As soon as she entered, a few passengers recognized her and whispered, but no one expressed displeasure. On the contrary, many looked at her with silent respect. The woman she needed to see sat in seat 18C, small in stature with thinning silver hair, her thin hands clutching the seatbelt. When she saw Arielle, she stood up awkwardly. "Oh, you really came." Arielle smiled gently. "I came because you called me. Do you want to talk about something?" The old lady nodded, but her eyes were red. I saw what happened this morning," Arielle said softly. "Don't worry. I'm fine." "No, it's not like that." The old lady shook her head, her voice trembling. "I want to apologize." Arielle frowned slightly. "Sorry, for what?" She took a deep breath, tears falling with each word. "Because I used to be the silent one. I saw wrongdoings many times, but I still sat still. I used to be a flight attendant. I used to see colleagues being insulted just because they were of color. I used to see passengers being kicked out for no reason, like you, and I did nothing." Arielle stood still, not in surprise, but with the pang of someone who had carried it for too long. "I'm sorry," the old woman said through sobs. "I'm sorry I didn't protect anyone, not even once." Arielle placed her hands on her shoulders, as lightly as on thin wings. "You don't have to apologize to me. We did the best we could with what we had at the time." The old lady looked at her, her eyes filled with tears. "But you did something that I never dared to do in my life." Arielle squeezed her hand gently. "No one is too late to do the right thing, ma'am. You saying this today is already a very brave step." The old lady burst into tears, but it was the kind of cry that helps ease the heaviness in one's heart. Arielle sat next to her for a moment, holding her hand until she felt better. As she stood up, a young passenger across the row whispered to Arielle, "Thank you." Then another nodded. Then another. No one spoke loudly. No one applauded. But every glance, every nod, it all blended together into a very strange feeling. Not a fan, not a cheer, but it is the empathy of people who understand that they are on the same side, the side that wants the world to be kinder. As Arielle returned to first class, she felt the chill of the new air the plane was entering. But what warmed her heart was faith. The belief that today's changes weren't just happening on Flight SV418. They were spreading to the people in front of her, and they would carry it further than she could imagine. As soon as she sat down, the intercom came on. Dana's voice low, steady, and tinged with excitement and nervousness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have cleared the turbulence. A smooth journey to New York lies ahead. And I have a small announcement." Passengers began to raise their heads. Arielle also raised an eyebrow. Dana continued, "I want to thank you for your patience today. This is my first flight as a captain, and I want to say, there is no greater honor than to accompany all of you on this journey." A few soft wows echoed through the cabin. One passenger clapped, then another, then the whole cabin. Arielle looked up toward the cabin. She couldn't see Dana's face, but she imagined his faint smile. The smile of a man finally stepping into the place he deserves. She leaned back in her chair. Her heart felt much warmer. In that moment, Arielle understood that when a new tree is planted, it changes not only the soil it stands in, but also the entire garden. The plane began its descent as New York City appeared on the horizon, a glowing maze. The tall buildings reflected the late afternoon sun, casting a soft, golden glow that seemed inseparable from the bustling world below. Arielle looked down, feeling the plane tilt slightly, as Dana turned the controls to land. Even though she had been on planes hundreds of times, she felt something strange in this moment, a feeling of warmth and cold like an invisible thread pulling her back to what she had experienced all her life. Today will be remembered. Today will hurt, some, free some, and open the future for more people than you can imagine. The intercom turned on Dana's voice, calm, deep, and familiar. "Ladies and gentlemen, SV418 is about to land at John F. Kennedy Airport. Please hold your seatbelt until the plane comes to a complete stop. Thank you for your cooperation." The way he said companion made the cabin quiet for a few seconds. It wasn't the authoritative voice of a pilot. It was the voice of someone who truly appreciated the people sitting behind him. Arielle smiled slightly. "That's right, Dana. This isn't just a flight. This is a statement." The plane's wheels touched the runway with such a light force that many passengers were startled because they didn't feel the familiar bounce. Evan turned around, eyes wide. "Wow. Miss Morgan, did you feel it?" Captain Caldwell landed like he was sliding on ice. Arielle laughed. "He may not know, but I think I'll tell the pilot team about this." Evan held the notebook tightly, his eyes sparkling. "If I take the exam to get into a flight school someday, I want to be able to land like that." Arielle placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "Someday, I will do better than that." Evan blushed, bowing his head to hide his uncontrollable smile. As the plane slowed and pulled into the gate, Jerome stood up to prepare for the welcome ceremony. But something unexpected happened. A round of applause broke out spontaneously without anyone having initiated it. Perhaps it started in compartment 4, or perhaps in compartment 1. Then it spread to compartment 3, compartment 5, compartment 18. Arielle turned back. Everyone was clapping not just for the perfect landing, but because today they had witnessed the beginning of real change. Jerome looked at Arielle, his eyes stinging. "I have been in this profession for more than 10 years. I have never seen a passenger clap before." The pilot saluted. Arielle smiled softly. "Maybe." "They clapped for more than one flight." Jerome nodded. "Yeah, they're clapping for the right thing." The cockpit door opened. Dana stepped out, still stunned by the applause. Reeves stood behind him, patting him on the shoulder. "Welcome, Captain. You made a spectacular debut." Dana looked around as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Passengers stood up, many nodded, many reached out to shake his hand as he passed. An old lady said, "You did well, boy." A businessman said, "From now on I will pay attention to the captain's name before flying. Hope to see you again." Another person patted him on the shoulder. "Keep flying like you did today. You have a quality that many pilots have lost." Dana didn't know what to answer. He just bowed his head, his mouth trembling with gratitude. Thank you everyone." When his eyes met Arielle's, he stopped. Arielle said nothing, just nodded. A nod that Dana interpreted as, "I'm proud of you." As passengers began to disembark, Arielle waited at the exit, not to be noticed, but because she wanted to see each person step off in the hopes that they would take something with them from today. A blonde white woman stopped before her, her eyes filled with emotion. "Miss Morgan, I have 2 daughters. One is white, one is black. They are my adopted children. Thank you for today, for showing my little girl that she can be anything." Arielle put her hand on the woman's hand. As long as you love her, the world can do nothing to her. The woman smiled and walked on. Then a middle-aged man came to her. You make me feel ashamed of myself, but in a way that makes me want to be better. Arielle nodded slightly without judgment. A young girl said, I used to be afraid to speak up because I thought I was small. You changed me. Another said, Miss Morgan, I feel a little more hopeful about America today. Arielle listened to every word, not proudly, not smugly, but quietly, like someone gathering pieces of another person's heart into her own. When the plane was finally left with only the crew, Dana approached Arielle. He stood straight, but his eyes were warm and sincere. Miss Morgan, thank you. Without you, I would never have had the chance to prove myself. Arielle shook her head slightly. Dana, the opportunity did not come from me. It came from your own efforts. I was just the one who saw it before you. Dana laughed, her first real laugh all day. Anyway, I still owe you a thank you. Arielle smiled. Then pay by leading with kindness. No power, no shouting. Kindness holds up the whole sky. Dana sighed as if she had just taken a silent oath. I promise. She nodded. Jerome walked over his face, still beaming. Miss Morgan, let's go out now. The press is waiting by the stairs. Arielle closed her eyes for a second to take a deep breath to gather her composure. She stepped out the door. The cold New York wind swept across her face, awakening sharp as a blade but also invigorating. 2 rows of airport staff stood ready, and behind them were rows of flashing cameras. A reporter shouted, Miss Morgan, what statement do you have about Captain Holloway? Do you think you are being discriminated against? Will you change internal policy? Arielle stopped. She turned. Her eyes looked directly into each camera. Her voice was deep, clear, and calm as deep water. Today, a captain who abused his power was suspended. But that doesn't mean Sky Vista is weak. It means Sky Vista is strong enough to correct the mistake. The reporters were silent. She continued, I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here to rebuild the culture. And today, the passengers and crew showed one thing: kindness is not weakness. Kindness is strength. Many people stopped taking notes. A few cameras lowered. She concluded, I don't want an airline where people fear authority. I want an airline where people believe in what is right, and I will work every day to make sure that happens. Arielle walked away, not waiting for a response. She didn't need to. She knew those words had gone into the newspapers, into the ears of the people, into the hearts of those who had been hurt by injustice. And in that moment she felt what she had been searching for all her life. Not power, not position, but it is the right thing. A power that no one can take away. As the SUV door closed behind Arielle, she leaned her head back in the seat and closed her eyes. Jerome sat in front, turning his head slightly. Are you okay, Miss Morgan? Arielle smiled so lightly it was like a breeze. I'm fine, Jerome. Dana walked past the car toward the pilot's quarters, looking back at her one last time. She raised her hand, not high, but enough for him to see, and he nodded, like an unspoken oath. The SUV moved. The windows reflected the sky, yellow, then blue, then purple. Arielle opened her eyes and looked outside. Today was the day the world changed a little, and tomorrow she would continue. Arielle Morgan's story is not just about power or position. It is about the millions of people who have been undervalued because of the color of their skin, the way they dress, or the ordinary appearance they have. It reminds us that sometimes what makes a person strong is not the position they hold, but the calm they show in the face of injustice and the kindness they choose when they have the power to punish. Arielle shows real change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from having the courage to stand up for what's right. It comes from deciding not to retaliate, but to build. And most importantly, it comes from believing that every human being deserves respect. For older viewers, perhaps we all have suffered a silent wound from judgment. But this story reminds us, it's never too late to choose hope. It's never too late to stand up for what's right. And it's never too late to be kinder to each other. Kindness does not weaken us. Kindness is the strength that makes us taller than adversity. Thank you for sticking with me through this emotional journey.